The wind comes first, cutting across a frozen world where forests have vanished, rivers lie under ice, and survival depends on every track in the snow. Long before cities, kingdoms, or written history, small bands of Ice Age people crossed this brutal landscape with nothing but fire, stone, memory, and each other. They hunted giants, built shelters from bones, followed herds across impossible distances, and somehow endured a world that should have erased them completely. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of ancient history and human mystery you enjoy, because the story of these forgotten survivors begins where comfort ends. The wind does not arrive as weather, it arrives as a wall. It comes low across the open steppe, dragging powdered snow over frozen grass, scraping the ground until the world seems to be made of stone, bone, and breath. There are no forests here in the way later people will imagine forests, no deep green shelter, no soft abundance waiting beyond the next hill. In many places, trees are rare, scattered, twisted by cold, or gone entirely. The land lies exposed beneath a pale sky, and across it move the animals that make human life possible: reindeer in nervous lines, horses with frost in their manes, bison pushing through wind, and, farther off, the immense dark shapes of mammoths crossing the horizon like something older than memory. Somewhere in this frozen world, a small group of people keeps moving. They are not primitive shadows wandering blindly through a hostile landscape. They are skilled, observant, and intensely practical. Every step they take is shaped by knowledge passed through generations, where herds tend to cross rivers, where flint can be found beneath snow, where caves hold warmth, where deadwood may still be gathered, where the wind cuts hardest, where thin ice lies under new frost. Their world is dangerous, but not unknown to them. It has patterns. It has seasons. It has signs. A broken crust of snow, a shift in bird movement, a distant line of animals, a certain colour in the evening sky can all matter. In a place where a mistake can freeze a child, starve a camp, or send hunters home empty-handed, attention is not a virtue. It is survival. This is the age near the coldest part of the last ice age. The time archaeologists call the last glacial maximum. Huge ice sheets cover northern lands. Sea levels fall because so much water is locked in ice. Coasts lie far beyond their modern shorelines. Deserts expand in some regions, not because the world is hot, but because cold can be dry, and dry cold can be merciless. Much of Europe and northern Asia becomes a vast, open, wind-scoured environment. It is not simply a snowy wasteland. It is a living world, but one that demands payment for every scrap of life it allows. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because the people in this story left no written names, no kingdoms, no monuments meant to impress strangers thousands of years later. What they left is quieter stone blades, hearth ash, bones split for marrow, ornaments pierced by careful hands, footprints pressed briefly into soft ground before the cold took them, and sometimes the fragile remains of their own bodies. From those traces, a picture begins to form of people who survived in conditions that would break most modern communities within days. Imagine a winter camp at the edge of a river valley. The river may be sealed under ice, but it is still a guide through the landscape, a path for animals, a marker in a world where snow can erase distance. The people choose the place carefully. It offers some shelter from the wind, a view across open ground, access to fuel, and perhaps old bones from previous kills. Fire burns low, protected as much as possible, because fire is not only warmth, it is light, it is protection. It softens frozen meat, heats stone, dries clothing, hardens points, keeps hands alive long enough to work. Around it, people repair tools, scrape hides, break bone, share food, watch children, and listen. The camp is small, but it is not simple. It is a living machine of memory, labour, and trust. The cold shapes everything. Clothing is not decoration first, it is architecture for the body. Hides must be scraped, softened, cut, stitched, layered, repaired. A badly fitted sleeve can become a path for freezing air. Wet footwear can become a sentence. Needles made from bone or ivory, so small they can seem almost ordinary in a museum case, may be among the most important inventions in this world. They allow people to make fitted garments, close seams, line boots, and carry warmth with them. The evidence remains incomplete, because clothing rarely survives for tens of thousands of years, but the tools tell their own quiet story. People are not merely enduring the Ice Age, they are engineering themselves against it. Food is equally uncertain and equally vital. The large animals are impressive, but they are not always easy to find and never easy to kill. Mammoths dominate the imagination because they are enormous, dramatic, and unforgettable. But survival often depends on a wider economy: reindeer, horse, hare, fish, birds, roots where they can be found, fat when it's available, marrow hidden inside bone, and stored resources when planning succeeds. Fat is especially precious in cold climates. Lean meat alone is not enough. The body needs energy dense enough to burn through long nights and punishing movement. A successful hunt may feed a group, but it also creates work that cannot wait. Meat must be cut, carried, dried, frozen, hidden, guarded from scavengers, and shared according to rules that archaeologists can only partly infer. What makes these people forgotten is not that they are unimportant. It is that their world is difficult to see. Ice erases, rivers move, coastlines drown when the glaciers melt, camps made of hide, bone, branch, and snow vanish more easily than stone cities. Many of the places where Ice Age people lived are now underwater, buried under later sediments, or scattered beyond recognition by thousands of years of thaw, flood, and growth. Archaeology finds what survives, not everything that mattered. So the people who knew the old paths, the vanished plains, the dry valleys, the hunting grounds now beneath seas, often appear only in fragments. And yet those fragments are powerful. A blade found far from the stone source suggests travel or exchange. A hearth in a cave suggests return. Animal bones cut in repeating ways suggest learned butchery. Red ochre on a tool or ornament hints at symbolic life. Though scholars still debate exactly what such marks meant in different places. A carved figurine, a pierced tooth, a pattern of beads, or a carefully arranged burial reminds us that these people are not living only from hunger to hunger. They carry identities. They recognize beauty. They mark belonging. They remember the dead. They teach the young not only how to survive, but how to be part of a human world. The strange truth is that the Ice Age is not one endless disaster. For the people who know how to read it, it can also be a world of opportunity. The open steppe supports huge herds. Long sightlines help hunters watch movement across distance. Frozen ground can preserve tracks. Snow can reveal where animals have passed. Cold can store meat. Rivers, ridges, and valleys create routes that generations learn by heart. But this opportunity is fragile. A shift in climate, a failed migration of herds, a storm at the wrong time, an injury to a skilled hunter, a fire that dies, a birth in deep winter, any one of these can tilt the balance. So the forgotten Ice Age people live close to the edge, but not as helpless victims of nature. They are survivors of an extreme experiment in human endurance. Their lives prove that humanity's strength has never been only muscle or speed. It is memory. It is cooperation. It is the ability to imagine tomorrow's hunger while today's fire is still burning. It is the patience to shape a blade from stone, stitch a seam by firelight, follow a herd across a frozen horizon, and trust that somewhere beyond the wind there is another valley, another shelter, another chance. In that sense, the impossible world does not merely threaten them, it reveals them. It strips life down to its hardest truths and shows what human beings can become when comfort disappears. Long before farms, cities, kings, or written histories, these small bands learn to survive in a landscape that seems designed to leave nothing behind. And still, against the cold, against distance, against hunger, they leave traces, not loud ones, not monuments, just enough to tell us that they were here, and that the story of civilization begins much earlier than civilization itself. Long before the cold reaches its harshest grip, the people who will face it are already carrying a deep inheritance. They do not step into the frozen world as beginners. Behind them stretches an older human story of movement, invention, memory, and adaptation. A story written across river terraces, cave mouths, open-air camps, buried hearths, and the scattered stone left behind after a fire has gone cold. By the time the deepest Ice Age pressure closes over much of the northern world, human beings have already learned how to cross strange landscapes, rid animal movement, shape stone with extraordinary precision, and live inside social networks larger than any one camp. The cold will test them brutally, but it does not create their intelligence. It reveals what was already there. Across Europe and Western Asia, earlier Upper Paleolithic groups have been building a survival tradition for thousands of years. They live in a world that is already changeable, already cold at times, already marked by shifting herds and unstable seasons. These are not settled farmers, and they do not think in terms of fixed borders or permanent towns. Their maps are remembered through experienced river bends, limestone shelters, flint seams, salt places, animal trails, ridge lines, distant mountains, dangerous crossings, and good camping ground. A child growing up in such a world does not learn survival from a written lesson. Knowledge is absorbed by watching hands work, by following adults along familiar paths, by hearing where animals were found last year and where they may go when the weather changes again. One of the great strengths of these people lies in the way they make stone behave almost like a planned material. To an untrained eye, a scatter of flint flakes may look like debris. To an archaeologist, it can preserve the sequence of thought, a prepared core, a long blade struck in a controlled motion, a retouched edge, a berin for working bone or antler, a backed bladelet meant to be fixed into a shaft, all of these show planning before action. The tool is not only the sharp piece held in the hand, it is part of a system. A hunter may carry a weapon made from wood, bone, antler, sinew, resin, and stone, with each material chosen for a reason. Some parts survive in the ground, many vanish. What survives in the record suggests a technological world much richer than the few hard fragments left behind. This matters because the coldest centuries will punish anyone who relies on improvisation alone. Before that crisis, people are already developing flexible toolkits. They can repair weapons away from the original source of stone. They can carry small inserts rather than heavy blocks. They can transform antler into points, bone into needles, ivory into ornaments, hide into containers, and perhaps plant fibers into cordage that almost never survives. Scholars still debate the full range of perishable technology because wood, leather, sinew, basketry, and fibre usually disappear unless conditions are unusually favourable. But no one who studies these societies closely imagines that their world was made only of stone. The missing materials may have been among the most important. Their roots are also older than the Great Freeze. Some groups move seasonally between lowlands and uplands, rivers and plateaus, sheltered valleys and open hunting grounds. Others may return again and again to favoured caves or rock shelters, leaving thin layers of ash, bone, pigment, and stone. A place may not be a home in the modern sense, but it can become familiar across generations. The same shelter might be used during certain seasons, abandoned. then found again by descendants who know the shape of the hills even if the people who first slept there are gone. In some regions, raw materials travel surprising distances, hinting at exchange, long-range movement, or social connections between groups. A blade made from stone found far away can be a quiet sign that people are not isolated dots in an empty world. They are linked. This connectedness may become one of their greatest defences. In a harsh climate, a single small band is vulnerable. Illness, bad luck, conflict, a failed hunt, or a shortage of marriage partners can weaken it quickly. Larger social networks help solve problems that no family can solve alone. People may gather at certain times when herds are abundant, when weather allows travel, or when ritual and exchange pull scattered groups together. At such meetings, they can share information, trade materials, arrange partnerships, renew bonds, and perhaps tell stories that hold distant landscapes in memory. The evidence remains incomplete, but ornaments, repeated artistic styles, and the movement of stone suggest a world where identity stretches beyond the campfire. There is also a symbolic inheritance, and it is one of the most haunting parts of this older world. Before the deepest cold, people are already making marks that are not merely practical. They use red ochre, carve bone and ivory, pierce shells and teeth, shape beads, decorate objects, and in some places create images of animals, bodies, signs, and forms whose meanings remain uncertain. Some of this art appears in caves, but much of Ice Age expression probably travelled on bodies and objects. Pendants, clothing, bags, weapons, hair ornaments, painted skin. The famous images that survive on stone walls may be only the most durable edge of a much wider visual culture. No single explanation fully accounts for this. Some images may relate to animals, memory, teaching, ritual, identity, or places of special significance. The mistake would be to reduce them to one purpose, as if every mark made across thousands of years and vast distances must mean the same thing. The people before the deep freeze also inherit relationships with animals that are more complex than simple hunting. They know the habits of herds intimately. They understand where animals feed, how they respond to weather when they are vulnerable, and how dangerous they can be at close range. Mammoth, horse, bison, reindeer, ibex, deer, and smaller animals each demand different strategies. Some hunts may involve careful stalking, others may depend on landscape traps, river crossings, snow conditions, or coordinated movement by several hunters. Even scavenging can require skill and courage, because a carcass on the steppe is also a signal to wolves, lions, hyenas, and other competitors. Human beings are formidable, but they're not alone at the table. There are signs, too, of experimentation that does not fit the old stereotype of Ice Age life as bare necessity. At sites such as Dolny Vestonis and nearby Pavlovian settlements, people in the broader Ice Age world make fired clay figurines long before pottery becomes a household technology. Some of these objects crack or explode in firing, perhaps accidentally, perhaps as part of a practice whose meaning is still debated. The detail is surprising because it shows that fire is not only for warmth and food, it is a tool for transformation. People are testing materials, observing heat, creating objects that endure in strange ways. The later world will call such things art, ritual, craft, or experiment, but for the people who make them, the divisions may not exist so neatly. All of this means that when the climate worsens, the survivors are not starting from emptiness. They carry fitted clothing traditions, composite tools, remembered migration corridors, seasonal gathering places, symbolic systems, rules of sharing, and the ability to learn quickly from a shifting world. The cold will still break some groups. It will close routes, empty regions, and force populations toward refuges. It will turn familiar land into something harsher and sometimes unlivable. But the people who endure do so because their ancestors have already built a human way of life flexible enough to bend without immediately snapping. The forgotten Ice Age survivors are therefore not just people trapped in a frozen disaster. They are heirs to thousands of years of quiet invention. Every blade in a pouch, every repaired seam, every remembered valley, every bead sewn onto clothing, every story told beside a fire becomes part of the equipment with which they face the impossible. The deep freeze is coming, but before it arrives, humanity has already learned one of its oldest lessons: survival is not a single skill. It is a culture. Then the world tightens. It does not happen in a single winter, with one sudden storm that everyone can remember. It comes through generations, unevenly, with colder decades, shifting winds, failed returns of familiar animals, rivers freezing longer, open ground spreading where shelter once stood, and seasons becoming harder to predict. Around 26,000 years ago, and especially through the long cold pulse that follows, the northern world moves toward one of the most severe climate states modern humans have ever endured. Ice sheets thicken across the north, glaciers press down on mountains, sea levels fall far below the shores known today. The air grows drier in many regions, and winds lift fine dust from exposed plains, carrying it across immense distances. The landscape does not merely become colder, it becomes sharper, emptier, more demanding. For the people living near the edge of this transformation, familiar places begin to lose their old reliability. A valley that once offered seasonal shelter may become too exposed. A river crossing may change. Herds that once arrived in expected numbers may pass farther away or not at all. Wood becomes more difficult to find in many open regions, and that simple fact alters everything. Fire can be made from bone and fat in some situations, and people can burn what the landscape offers. But fuel scarcity is not a small inconvenience. It changes where camps can be placed, how long people can remain, how much labour is spent gathering, and how carefully every flame must be guarded. Cold is not only a temperature, it is a chain of problems. The archaeological record begins to show this pressure in a haunting way. In some regions, signs of human presence become thinner, sites appear less often, occupation layers become sparse. Places that had once been used repeatedly seem to fall silent. Scholars still debate how much of this reflects real population decline and how much comes from the accidents of preservation and discovery. Because absence in archaeology is always difficult to interpret, yet the broad pattern is hard to ignore. During the coldest stages, human groups in parts of Europe and northern Asia appear to contract, moving away from the most punishing zones and concentrating where survival remains possible. The world is not empty everywhere, but it becomes emptier in ways people would have felt. To imagine that contraction, picture not a single tribe fleeing south in panic, but a slow narrowing of options. A band returns to a known hunting ground and finds the animals scattered. Another tries to cross a familiar open stretch and loses time to storms. A family group reaches an old camp and discovers that fuel is nearly gone, or that snow lies too deep, or that the valley no longer holds the tracks it once did. Such moments leave little direct evidence. Archaeology rarely preserves disappointment, but the movement of people away from harsher regions, the disappearance of repeated occupations, and the clustering of later evidence in more favourable zones suggest that choices like these were made again and again. The coldest world is also a world of distance. With sea levels lower, coastlines lie far beyond their present positions, exposing plains that will later drown beneath rising seas. Some of these lost lands may have been important corridors, hunting grounds, or seasonal territories, but much of their story is hidden underwater now. Inland, the open mammoth steppe can stretch across vast spaces, rich in animals in some places, nearly barren in others. Snow, wind. and frozen ground can make travel both possible and deadly. A hard surface may help movement, while a storm can erase direction. There are no roads except the ones made by memory, animals, rivers, stars, ridges, and repeated use. In such a world, knowing when not to move may be as important as knowing where to go. Survival becomes an art of precision. Hunters cannot waste weapons. Toolmakers cannot waste good stone. Children cannot be allowed to wander beyond sight in bad weather. Hides must be prepared before the cold breaks them stiff. Meat must be processed quickly before scavengers find it or before weather makes work impossible. The body itself becomes a resource to manage. Calories spent travelling must be repaid. A long chase can cost more than it gains. A wound can turn from inconvenience to disaster. A broken point at the wrong moment can mean hunger. This is one reason the small technologies of the Ice Age matter so much. A needle, a scraper, a lamp, a fitted boot, a carefully shaped blade, a repaired spear point. These are not background details. They are the difference between enduring the cold and being defeated by it. The animals face their own crisis. The great herds that sustain human life are not fixed in place. They respond to vegetation, snow cover, water, predators, and seasonal pressures. Reindeer may offer dependable movement in some landscapes, while horse and bison favour others. Mammoths, so powerful in human imagination, are not everywhere and not always available. Their presence can make a region seem abundant, but dependence on any single animal would be dangerous. The evidence from bones at Ice Age sites suggests that people often adjust their hunting to local conditions, taking what the environment offers rather than following one rigid pattern. No single explanation fully accounts for survival across such varied landscapes. Flexibility is the rule. There is a cruel paradox here. The cold world can support enormous animals, and where herds gather, human life can flourish for a time. But abundance is never evenly distributed. One valley may be alive with movement while another lies nearly bare. A brief improvement may draw people back into a region, only for colder or drier conditions to push them away again. Climate is not a smooth line. It pulses, it wavers. It creates windows and closes them. People living through it would not have seen a graph or a named event. They would have known it as hunger, wind, migration, birth, death, and the memory of how things used to be. The pressure also falls on social life. When populations contract, groups may become separated by larger empty spaces. Meeting others becomes harder, and that can have consequences beyond loneliness. Exchange networks weaken. Marriage partners are fewer. News travels more slowly. Specialized knowledge may become fragile if too few people carry it. At the same time, the need for connection becomes greater. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is likely that seasonal gatherings, long-distance ties, and shared symbolic traditions helped some groups resist isolation. A pendant, a style of tool-making, or a piece of stone from far away can suggest that even under stress, people still reach toward one another across the cold. Yet not everyone survives in the same way. Some communities may move south or toward milder Atlantic margins. Others may retreat into river valleys, sheltered basins, or regions where animals remain predictable. Some may merge with neighbouring groups. Some may fade from the record entirely. Archaeologists must be careful here, because a vanished site does not automatically mean a vanished people. They may have shifted to places not yet found, or to coastal plains now underwater, or to camps too light to survive in the soil. But the silence itself is part of the story. The coldest ice age leaves gaps where human presence once seemed more secure. By around 20,000 years ago, the impossible world has done its work. It has not destroyed humanity, but it has rearranged it. It has forced people to concentrate, adapt, abandon, remember, and improvise. It has separated some communities and preserved others in pockets of endurance. It has turned survival into a narrow passage through which only certain combinations of knowledge, luck, mobility, and cooperation can pass. The forgotten Ice Age people do not conquer the cold. They negotiate with it day after day, season after season, knowing that the terms can change without warning. And somewhere beyond the worst winds, in places where the land gives just enough shelter, the story continues. The people who endure the coldest world do not survive everywhere. They survive where the land gives them a margin. Not comfort, not safety, not abundance in any easy sense, but a margin wide enough for life to continue. Along the edges of the frozen continent, in valleys protected from the worst winds, near Atlantic coasts, in southern peninsulas, beside rivers that still draw animals through open country, human presence gathers more densely than it does across the abandoned spaces to the north. The Ice Age does not treat the whole world equally. It crushes some regions beneath ice, dries others into hard steppe, and leaves certain pockets just sheltered enough to become refuges. Iberia becomes one of the most important of these places. The peninsula is not a paradise. It has mountains, cold uplands, rough weather, and landscapes that change sharply from coast to interior. But compared with the exposed northern plains, parts of Iberia offer milder conditions, varied habitats, and access to resources across shorter distances. Atlantic-facing regions, river valleys, limestone shelters, and coastal zones may have provided a mosaic of possibilities. People can hunt herd animals in open country, gather smaller resources in sheltered zones, exploit rivers, and perhaps use marine foods where coastlines allow, though many Ice Age coastal sites now lie far beyond modern shores and are hidden beneath the sea. What survives in the record suggests that some groups here do more than cling to existence. They maintain traditions, return to places, make tools, create ornaments, and carry cultural memory through the cold. Farther north, parts of what is now southern France also become important. The region around the Dordogne, the Pyrenees, and the broader Franco-Cantabrian zone preserves rich traces of Ice Age life, not because everyone lived there all the time, but because the conditions, geology, and later discovery have allowed an unusual window into human survival. Caves and rock shelters protect evidence that open-air camps often lose. Animal bones, hearths, stone tools, carved objects, and wall art survive in ways that make this region seem almost crowded compared with the silence elsewhere. But the impression must be handled carefully. Archaeology is not a perfect map of ancient population. Some places preserve better than others. Some have been searched more intensively. Scholars still debate how much the apparent density reflects true Ice Age settlement and how much reflects the luck of preservation and research. Still, refuges are not only archaeological conveniences, they are biological and cultural realities. When the northern world becomes too harsh, people need places where births can outnumber deaths, where groups can meet often enough to exchange partners and knowledge, where children can learn a landscape without being forced constantly into emergency movement. These areas may preserve not only bodies, but ways of life. A refuge is not simply a cave with a fire, it is a network of roots. Hunting grounds, raw materials, water, seasonal shelters, meeting places, memories, and relationships. It is a human geography layered over a natural one. In such places, survival takes on a different rhythm from life on the most exposed margins. People still move, but movement can be planned across a known range. A group might spend part of the year near river corridors where animals pass, another part in uplands or sheltered valleys, another near places where stone can be collected or worked. They may return to the same cave mouth in certain seasons, not because they are settled, but because a good place remains good if the world around it continues to cooperate. A hearth layer in a shelter can represent a brief stay, a repeated tradition, or generations of returns separated by long gaps. The evidence remains incomplete, but these repeated traces suggest that memory binds people to landscapes even when they do not build permanent homes. The animals of the refugees are also varied. Reindeer may dominate in colder open settings, while horse, ibex, red deer, bison, and smaller game appear depending on region and season. In mountainous zones, ibex can matter greatly. Along rivers, fish and birds may add to the diet. In coastal areas, shellfish and marine mammals may have been available, though the lost Ice Age shoreline makes that story difficult to recover. This variety is important. A community that can draw on several resource zones is less vulnerable than one dependent on a single herd route. In an age when climate instability can redirect animals, variety is insurance. One lesser-known detail is how much topography matters. A few kilometers can separate a deadly exposure from a usable shelter. South-facing slopes may hold different vegetation from shaded valleys. Limestone caves can preserve warmth better than open camps. River gorges can break wind and guide animals. Mountain ranges can be barriers, but also organizers of movement, forcing herds and people through predictable corridors from far away. An Ice Age map may look like a broad wash of climate zones. On the ground, survival is often decided by small differences where snow melts first, where flint lies near water, where a cliff blocks the wind, where animals cannot easily escape. Other possible refuges exist beyond Iberia and southern France, Italy, the Balkans, parts of the Black Sea region, areas around the Caucasus, and sheltered zones farther east may also have preserved human groups through different phases of the cold, but each region has its own complications. Mountains can isolate. Sea level change can erase coastal evidence. Later human occupation can disturb older layers. In some places, evidence appears strong. In others, the picture is patchy. No single explanation fully accounts for why some groups persist and others vanish from view. Climate matters, but so do local ecology, social networks, technology, population size, and chance. Within these refuges, culture does not freeze in place. People adapt. Tool traditions change. Artistic expression continues and transforms. Ornaments and symbolic objects suggest that identity remains important even under pressure. In the Franco-Cantabrian world, some of the most famous Ice Age cave art will eventually appear, though it belongs to a long and varied tradition rather than one sudden miracle. Painted animals deep underground can feel mysterious to modern viewers, but they are part of a broader pattern in which people engage with animals, places, darkness, memory, and perhaps ritual in ways that cannot be reduced to simple decoration. The meaning is still debated, but the persistence of symbolic life tells us something essential. Even in refuges shaped by hunger and cold, people are not living as mere survival machines. A refuge can also become a reservoir. When conditions improve, people from these sheltered regions may move outward, following herds, rivers, and newly opened land. The knowledge preserved in refuges can expand again into spaces once emptied by ice and wind. In that sense, these places are not endpoints. They are pauses in a much longer movement, holding human life through the worst pressure until the world begins to loosen. But from the perspective of those living there, the future is not a grand repopulation. It is the next winter, the next hunt, the next child born into a cold shelter, the next journey across a ridge where the wind may or may not allow passage. The forgotten Ice Age people survive the impossible not because they find a hidden paradise, but because they learn the value of margins. They know that a sheltered valley can matter as much as a great invention. They know that a cave mouth facing the right direction can hold a family through a storm. They know that memory of a distant river can save a starving group years later. Their world has narrowed, but it has not closed. Along the edges of the ice, in places history almost missed, the human line remains alive. To live through the coldest age, people have to understand that home is not always a place. Sometimes home is a route. It is a chain of river bends, hill shadows, cave mouths, flint outcrops, animal crossings, sheltered slopes, and remembered fires stretched across a landscape too large for any one camp to hold. The forgotten Ice Age people do not survive by standing still and waiting for the world to become kind. They survive by moving with purpose, by knowing when a place is worth returning to and when it must be abandoned, by reading the land not as empty wilderness, but as a map filled with warnings and promises. Motion is not wandering. That distinction matters. To modernize, a group crossing frozen plains with no permanent house may look rootless, but these people are not lost. Their movement follows knowledge. A river valley may lead them toward herds in one season, and fish or birds in another. A limestone shelter may be useful during storms, but useless if animals have shifted away. A flint source may draw toolmakers back again and again. Because good stone is not found everywhere, and a poor blade can fail when failure costs blood. A ridge may offer a view across open steppe, but it may also expose travellers to winds so fierce that turning back becomes wisdom, not weakness. The landscape is not a backdrop, and it is a system of decisions. Seasonal movement allows people to spread risk. In one part of the year, reindeer may move through open ground in large numbers. In another, horses or bison may be more important. In mountain regions, ibex may become predictable along slopes and passes. Near rivers, fish runs, water birds, and trapped animals can matter. In sheltered pockets, roots, berries, and plant materials may become available during warmer months. Though plant foods rarely survive well enough for archaeology to show their full importance. The evidence remains incomplete, but it would be a mistake to imagine Ice Age diets only as dramatic hunts of giant beasts. Survival often depends on smaller, quieter resources that leave fewer traces. Movement also keeps people connected. A single band may be too small to carry everything a human society needs across generations. Knowledge can disappear if only one elder knows a route and dies before teaching it. A tool-making technique can fade if the best craftsperson is lost. Families need partners from beyond their immediate circle. News matters where herds are moving, where storms have damaged a region, where another group found good stone, where disease or conflict has made a place dangerous. By moving along known circuits, people make contact possible. A meeting in a valley during a season of animal abundance may carry consequences for years. Objects change hands, partners are chosen. Stories travel farther than any one person can walk. Archaeologists sometimes glimpse these connections through raw materials. Stone found far from its geological source can suggest long-distance movement or exchange between groups. Shells discovered inland, ornaments made from unusual materials, and similar styles appearing across wide regions may point to networks that link scattered communities. Scholars still debate the exact meaning of these patterns in many cases, because a distant material does not always tell us whether one person carried it, several groups traded it, or generations passed it from hand to hand. But the larger message is clear enough. Ice Age people are not isolated survivors trapped beside individual fires. They are participants in wider human worlds. Their camps reflect this mobility. Some are brief stops, places where tools are repaired, meat is butchered, and the group moves on. Others are longer occupations, perhaps used when herds are nearby or when weather makes travel dangerous. A cave can serve as a shelter, a workshop, a lookout, a place of return, or a place of memory. Open-air camps may have been just as important, but they are more easily destroyed by time. Wind scatters ash. Rivers cut through old surfaces. Soil shifts. Later vegetation covers the evidence. What survives often favours stone, bone, and sheltered places, leaving the most ordinary parts of life strangely invisible. There is a discipline to travelling in such a world. A group cannot carry everything. Every object must earn its weight. A tool may be designed for repair rather than replacement. A blade core may be prepared so that useful flakes can be struck later. Hide containers, wooden shafts, sinew bindings, bone needles, pigments, ornaments, fire-making materials, and food all compete for space. Children, elders, and injured people shape the pace. A storm can trap a group in place. A thaw can make ground treacherous. A frozen river can become either a road or a grave. Movement is freedom, but it is also calculation. One lesser-known truth is that mobility can create deep attachment rather than prevent it. People who move through the same regions year after year may know them more intimately than settled. People know a single village. They know where the first spring growth appears, where animals hesitate before crossing water, where certain stones split cleanly, where smoke lies low in damp air, where wolves tend to follow herds, where a sheltered hollow can save lives. Their world is remembered in sequences. After the river bend comes the red cliff. Beyond the red cliff, the slope with dry wood. Beyond that, the place where reindeer sometimes gather before the snow hardens. The map lives in the body as much as in speech. This kind of knowledge must be taught carefully. Children learn by walking. They learn distances not from numbers, but from fatigue, weather, hunger, and repetition. They watch adults test ice, choose stones, cut meat, read tracks, and decide whether to continue or turn back. They learn that a footprint is not just a mark. It can reveal direction, speed, weight, health, and time. They learn that silence can mean danger, that birds can betray the presence of animals, that a change in wind can carry scent away from prey or toward a predator. These lessons are not dramatic in the archaeological record, but without them, no technology is enough. Mobility also shapes belief and memory. A people who live by roots may think of certain places as powerful because survival has happened there before. A cave where ancestors returned, a crossing where animals appear, a hill visible from far away, a place where someone died, a stone source used across generations. Such locations can become more than practical markers. They can carry stories. The evidence for spiritual meaning is often indirect, and no single explanation fully accounts for Ice Age symbolic life. But repeated return to certain places suggests that landscapes are not only used, they are remembered. Yet motion has limits. When the climate becomes too harsh, roots can break, ice can block passages, herds can abandon corridors, empty space between groups can widen until contact becomes rare. A mobile society depends on the world remaining legible. When the signs change too quickly, old knowledge can become dangerous. This is one of the great pressures of the last glacial maximum. It does not simply make life cold, it threatens the reliability of memory. Still, across the frozen margins, people keep moving until they follow rivers, skirt ice, cross exposed plains when weather allows, retreat to shelters when it does not, and carry their world with them in tools, stories, scars, ornaments, and remembered paths. They have no roads, but they are not roadless. Their roads are older than paving stones. They are made of footsteps repeated through generations, vanishing each season beneath snow, then returning again when survival calls them forward. In the open country of the Ice Age, shelter is not always found. Sometimes it has to be made from the dead. Where forests are scarce and the wind moves without mercy across the steppe, the old idea of a home built from timber becomes almost useless. Wood exists in some places, but not always enough, not always near the right hunting grounds, and not always at the moment when a group needs protection. A cave can save lives, but caves are not everywhere, and many are far from the herds that sustain people through the cold. Rock shelters, riverbanks, snow walls, hide tents, shallow pits, and windbreaks all have their place. But in certain landscapes, especially on the mammoth steppe of Eastern Europe, people turn to one of the most astonishing building materials the Ice Age provides: the bones of giants. A mammoth is not simply an animal in this world, it is food, fat, hide, ivory, fuel, tool material, symbol, danger, and architecture. Its bones are enormous, heavy, curved, and durable. Tusks can form sweeping supports, skulls, shoulder blades, jaws, ribs, pelvises, and limb bones can be arranged into walls, rings, and frames. When covered with hides, packed with earth, reinforced with smaller bones, or combined with wooden elements that usually do not survive, such structures can become places where people work, sleep, repair clothing, prepare food, and endure weather that would make exposed life almost impossible. To stand inside one of these dwellings would be to stand within the remains of the animals that made survival possible. Some of the most famous traces of these homes come from Ice Age sites in what is now Ukraine and nearby regions, where archaeologists have uncovered circular or oval arrangements made from mammoth bones. At places such as Mezhirish and others across the East European plain, bones appear in patterns that suggest deliberate construction rather than random butchery waste. The image is powerful, a shelter made from skulls and tusks. A house built from creatures that once moved across the frozen grasslands in herds. But the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate important details. Were all these structures true dwellings, windbreaks, ritual spaces, storage areas, or combinations of several uses? Were the bones taken from hunted mammoths, scavenged from natural death sites, gathered over years, or collected from older bone accumulations in the landscape? No single explanation fully accounts for every site. What is clear is that these structures required planning. Mammoth bones are not light. Moving them demands labour and coordination. A single skull can be massively heavy, and tusks can be awkward to transport even if they are useful as curved supports. People building with such materials must understand weight, balance, wind direction, available covering, and the shape of the ground. They must decide which bones matter and where each should go. They must think not only like hunters, but like engineers. The final shelter may appear strange to modern eyes, but it is not crude. It is an intelligent answer to a cold, open world. Inside or near such structures, hearths often become the centre of life. Fire draws the dwelling together, though it also introduces problems. Smoke must escape, heat must be conserved, sparks must be watched around hides and dry materials, fuel must be found, and in treeless regions that may mean burning bone, especially when fat remains within it. Bone does not behave like wood. It can burn under the right conditions, but it requires heat and often works best as part of a managed fire. The surprising detail is that Ice Age people may have used the remains of large animals not only to build shelter, but to feed the flames within it. In a landscape where every resource has several lives, even a bone can become warmth after it has been structure, tool, or food. A mammoth bone dwelling is also a place of sound and smell. The wind presses against hide stretched over a frame. Snow gathers along the outer edges. Inside, there is smoke, grease, hide, damp fur, old ash, drying meat, worked ivory, scraped skin, and the close breath of human bodies. Tools lie near the fire where hands can find them. Stone blades are repaired in low light. Bone needles pass through hide. Children watch adults work, learning the order of tasks long before they can perform them well. Outside, scavengers may circle at a distance, attracted by refuse and bone, Wolves, foxes, ravens, and perhaps larger predators know that human camps mean opportunity, but also danger. These homes are not permanent villages in the later farming sense, yet they complicate the simple image of Ice Age people as always lightly passing through. Some mammoth bone sites suggest repeated use, storage, and organized activity. A group might remain in such a place for a season if resources are strong enough, or return when herds pass nearby. The surrounding landscape matters. A dwelling is useful only if it sits within reach of animals, water, fuel, stone, and roots. Its construction implies confidence that the place is worth the effort. In an age of motion, some locations become heavy with return. There is also an emotional weight to these structures, though archaeology can approach it only carefully. Imagine living within walls made from mammoths, animals that must have loomed enormously in human imagination. Their bodies could feed a community, but killing one was dangerous and not always possible. Their bones endured long after flesh vanished. Their tusks held shape like frozen moons. To use them as shelter may have been practical first. But human beings rarely live by practicality alone. A wall of mammoth skulls is protection, yet it may also be memory. It may mark success, belonging, power, or a relationship with the animals that dominated the steppe. Scholars still debate how much symbolic meaning should be read into these arrangements, but the possibility cannot be dismissed simply because survival was hard. The homes built from giants also reveal a larger truth about Ice Age adaptation. People are constantly turning the environment back upon itself. The cold gives them mammoths, and mammoths give them meat, hide, fat, bone, ivory, fuel, and form. The open plain gives them wind, and they answer with walls. Scarcity gives them few trees, and they answer with skeletons. Nothing is single purpose. A kill site can become a workshop. A carcass can become a camp. A bone heap can become a shelter. The boundary between hunting, building, cooking, tool-making, and memory blurs because life demands that every action serve more than one need. Not every Ice Age group builds this way. In regions with caves, wood, or different animals, shelter takes other forms, most of which vanish without leaving dramatic traces. Hide tents supported by wooden poles may have been widespread but rarely survive. Snow structures may leave almost nothing. Brush shelters disappear. Windbreaks collapse into invisible stains. The mammoth bone houses are famous partly because they endure, not because they represent all Ice Age homes. Archaeology often preserves the unusual more clearly than the ordinary. What survives in the record suggests brilliance, but also reminds us how much has vanished. Still, these dwellings stand as one of the clearest signs that the forgotten Ice Age people did not merely adapt to the impossible world, they redesigned it on human terms. In a land with little shelter, they made shelter from the largest bodies around them. In a cold that could kill quickly, they built spaces where work, warmth, teaching, and memory could continue. Beneath hides stretched over mammoth bones, with firelight moving across ivory and skull, the frozen world became briefly smaller. For a night, a week, a season, the wind remained outside. And inside, human life held its ground. The cold plains feed people, but never gently. They offer life in the form of animals that are fast, wary, powerful, and often dangerous enough to kill the hunters who depend on them. To survive here, people must do more than chase meat. They must understand movement across an enormous living landscape. They must know when reindeer gather, when horses spread out, when bison become restless, when mammoths avoid certain ground, when birds signal water, when wolves are following the same herds for the same reason. The Ice Age economy is not a simple story of humans killing giant beasts. It is a constant negotiation with animals, weather, distance, hunger, and risk. On the open steppe, visibility can be both a gift and a curse. A hunter may see herds far away, dark against pale grass or snow, but the animals can also see danger approaching from a great distance. There are few trees to hide behind, few gentle folds in the land, and sound can travel strangely in cold air. The approach matters, wind direction matters, the condition of snow matters. A crust strong enough to hold a light human body might slow a heavier animal, or it might break beneath everyone and turn a chase into exhaustion. Frozen ground can preserve tracks, but drifting snow can erase them within hours. A hunting plan that works one day may fail the next because the wind has changed. Reindeer are among the most important animals in many Ice Age landscapes, not because they are easy, but because their seasonal movements can be learned. They travel in groups, follow patterns, and provide meat, fat, hide, antler, sinew, bone, and information. Where reindeer pass year after year, people may return to intercept them. A river crossing, a narrow valley, a slope between two ridges, or the edge of a marshy plain can become a place of repeated opportunity. But even a successful reindeer hunt demands organization. Animals must be driven, ambushed, cornered, or struck at the right moment. A wounded animal can escape across miles of frozen ground. A missed opportunity may not return for weeks. Horses and bison offer different challenges. They are strong, alert, and dangerous in close quarters. Their bodies provide large quantities of meat, but bringing one down requires weapons that work, hunters who cooperate, and luck that does not turn. Some hunts may have involved stalking individuals. Others may have used natural traps, snow conditions, river edges, or coordinated movement to guide animals toward disadvantage. Archaeological kill sites and butchery marks suggest human skill, but they rarely preserve the full drama of the hunt. What survives in the record is the aftermath: bones cut open, joints separated, marrow extracted, stone tools dulled by work. The moment of danger itself is usually gone. Mammoths occupy a special place in the imagination, and with reason. They are enormous, intelligent, socially complex animals, and any serious encounter with them would have required caution. The idea of Ice Age people casually hunting mammoths as if they were slow mountains waiting to fall is misleading. Mammoths could be hunted, and their remains appear at many sites, but scholars still debate how often humans killed healthy adults directly compared with scavenging carcasses. Hunting young or weakened animals, using natural traps, or exploiting animals that died for other reasons. No single explanation fully accounts for all mammoth bone accumulations. The truth likely varied by place, season, technology, and opportunity. For the people of the cold plains, a mammoth carcass, however obtained, is a fortune. It can feed many mouths, but it also creates urgent labor. Meat must be cut quickly, fat must be saved, hide must be worked before it becomes useless. Bones can be broken for marrow, shaped into tools, hauled for building, or burned when fuel is scarce. Ivory can be carved, split, and transformed. The carcass draws scavengers from the surrounding land. So humans must defend the prize or take what they can before larger competitors arrive. Lions, hyenas in earlier phases, wolves, foxes, ravens, and other animals all understand death as a signal. Humans are part of that community of scavengers and hunters, not separate from it. Smaller animals matter more than the grand paintings of Ice Age life often admit. Hare, fox, birds, fish, and other modest resources can keep people alive when large hunts fail. Fish caught through ice or in seasonal runs may provide crucial food. Birds can offer meat, feathers, bones, and eggs in warmer months. Hares and smaller mammals can be trapped, snared, or hunted with less danger than bison or mammoth, though they do not provide the same fat and calories. Plant foods, where available, may have supplemented diets, especially in milder seasons and refuges. The evidence remains incomplete because plants, traps, nets, and wooden tools rarely preserve well. But human survival in harsh environments usually depends on variety, not heroics alone. The most valuable prize is often not meat, but fat. In cold climates, the body burns energy relentlessly. Lean meat can fill the stomach and still fail to sustain life if fat is lacking. Marrow, brain, grease rendered from bone, animal fat stored or eaten quickly, and fatty tissues from certain seasons can be essential. This may explain the careful breaking of bones found at many sites. A cracked bone is not waste. It is a sealed container opened by knowledge. Even fragments that look unremarkable in the soil may represent a struggle to extract every possible calorie from an animal that cost great effort to obtain. Hunting also produces social obligations. A large kill cannot be eaten by one family before it spoils or freezes beyond easy processing. It must be shared, stored, or distributed through rules that are largely invisible archaeologically, but must have existed. Who receives which cut? Who owns a weapon? Who leads a hunt? Who has rights to meat from an animal they first wounded? How elders, children, pregnant women, and injured people are fed these questions shape survival as much as spear points do. The record rarely tells us the rules, but the rules must have mattered. Cooperation is not a sentimental ideal on the Ice Age plains, it is infrastructure. There is danger after success as well. Meat must be transported, and carrying heavy loads across cold ground is exhausting. A group may choose to butcher an animal where it falls, taking high-value parts back to camp and leaving the rest. In other cases, camps may be placed near predictable kill areas to reduce carrying distance. Stone tools found with animal bones can reveal where butchery happened, while missing body parts can suggest what was moved elsewhere. Archaeologists read these patterns carefully, though uncertainty remains because bones can be disturbed by water, animals, freezing, thawing, and time. The hunt is also a school. Young people learn not from speeches, but from repeated exposure to risk managed by adults. They learn how tracks age, how animals react when frightened, how to move without wasting strength, how to finish a wounded animal safely, how to cut hide, how to avoid ruining sinew, how to recognize disease, how to watch scavengers. They learn patience. Much of hunting is waiting for weather, waiting for animals to move, waiting for the right distance, waiting for a wounded creature to weaken, waiting for meat to dry or freeze. Survival belongs as much to restraint as to courage. And around the fire, after the meat is cut and the tools are cleaned, the animals remain present in other forms. Their hides cover bodies and shelters, their bones hold flames or walls, their teeth become ornaments, their antlers become tools, their movements shape stories, roots, gatherings, and memory. The cold plains are not conquered by humans, they're shared with animals that make human life possible, while constantly reminding people how fragile that life is. To hunt in this world is to live inside a relationship of dependence and danger. The forgotten Ice Age people follow the herds because the herds are the moving heart of the landscape. Without them, the plains become silence and wind. With them, there is food, clothing, shelter, fuel, tools, and the possibility of another season. So the people watch the horizon, they read the snow, they carry weapons repaired by firelight, and when the dark line of animals appears again in the distance, the entire human world gathers itself to move. Beside the fire, the Ice Age world becomes small enough for hands to master. Outside, the plains are immense, the animals dangerous, the wind beyond argument. But inside the glow of a hearth, survival narrows to edges, seams, points, sparks, and the careful pressure of fingers. A person turns a piece of flint in the hand, judging the angle by sight and memory. Another draws a scraper across a hide until the last clinging tissue lifts away. Someone bends close to a bone needle. guiding it through tough material in a rhythm learned through repetition. These are not minor tasks performed after the real struggle is over. They are the hidden machinery of survival, the quiet technologies that allow human bodies to exist where unprotected flesh would quickly fail. Stone is one of the most durable witnesses. It survives where wood rots, hide vanishes, sinew decays, and woven fibre disappears. Because of that, the archaeological record can make Ice Age life look sharper and harder than it truly was, as if human culture were made mostly from flint and bone. But every stone blade points beyond itself. A narrow flake may have been hafted into a wooden handle. A small backed bladelet may have formed part of a composite point. A berrin may have cut grooves in antler or ivory. A scraper may have prepared hides that became clothing, tents, bags, bedding, or bindings. The stone is often only the surviving tooth of a larger vanished tool. To make good stone tools, people need more than strength. They need foresight. A flint core must be prepared so that future flakes break in useful shapes. The angle of a strike matters. The force matters. The quality of the stone matters. Some materials fracture cleanly. Others betray the maker. A skilled napper can see a blade before it exists, reading the hidden geometry inside a lump of stone. That kind of knowledge is not improvised in a moment of need. It is trained into the body over years. A child may first watch, then imitate badly, leaving clumsy flakes that archaeologists sometimes recognize as beginner work. Even in the coldest world, learning leaves debris. The result is a toolkit built for repair and movement. Hunters can carry prepared cores, finished blades, or small inserts that can be replaced when damaged. A broken weapon does not always mean the loss of the whole weapon. A stone point can be reworked, a blade can be resharpened, a shaft can receive a new cutting edge. This modular way of thinking is one reason Ice Age technology is so powerful. It treats tools not as single objects, but as systems of parts: wood, antler, sinew, resin, hide. And stonework together, most of those materials disappear, leaving archaeologists to reconstruct the missing body from the bones that remain. Bone, antler, and ivory add another layer of ingenuity. These materials are not simply substitutes for stone. They have their own strengths. Antler can absorb shock. Bone can be shaped into points, awls, needles, and smooth tools for working hides. Ivory can be carved with remarkable delicacy, though it requires patience and skill. In some places, people make long points from bone or antler, weapons that may flex in ways stone cannot. They polish surfaces, cut grooves, drill holes, and create objects that are both useful and beautiful. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that Ice Age craft is not rough necessity alone. It is controlled, practiced, and often elegant. The needle may be one of the most important objects in this entire story. It looks small, almost fragile, especially compared with mammoth bones or spear points, but its consequences are enormous. Eyed needles made of bone allow people to sew fitted clothing with closed seams. They make it possible to shape hide around the body, to make layered garments, mittens, boots, hoods, bags, and perhaps lined sleeping coverings in a cold, windy landscape. Clothing must do more than hang from the shoulders. It must trap warm air, block drafts, protect joints, and remain functional while people walk, hunt, carry loads, and sleep. A poorly sewn seam can let cold enter like water through a cracked vessel. This is one of the less dramatic but most profound revolutions of the Ice Age. Human beings do not survive the cold only by becoming tougher. They survive by creating a second skin. The animal body becomes human protection. Hide, fur, sinew, and bone needle combine to turn the hunter's prey into a portable shelter. Archaeologists rarely find the clothing itself, so scholars still debate its exact forms, cuts, and regional differences. but the presence of needles, hide-working tools, and the demands of the climate make the larger point difficult to avoid. These people are dressed for the world they face, and their clothing is technology as sophisticated in its purpose as any blade. Fire sits at the center of all of this. It is warmth, but also transformation. Fire dries hides, hardens wooden points, cooks food, renders fat, cracks bone, creates light, changes pigments, and makes long winter hours usable. A hearth is a workshop as much as a comfort. Around it, people can continue tasks after daylight fades. They can repair tools, tell stories, watch the weather, and keep children close. In some Ice Age sites, stone lamps appear, sometimes using animal fat as fuel with a wick of plant fibre or moss. Such lamps are small, but their meaning is immense. They carry fire into darkness, including the deep spaces of caves where natural light never reaches. The making of fire itself is partly hidden from the record. People may have used methods involving flint, pyrite, tinder, embers carried from camp to camp, or combinations that varied by region and time. The evidence is difficult because the tools of fire-making are easily overlooked or destroyed, and the act leaves few clear signatures unless preservation is kind. What survives in the record suggests fire was managed with care. A living ember could be protected and transported. Dry tinder had to be gathered before it was needed. Fuel had to be chosen, rationed, and sometimes improvised. In treeless places, bone and fat may help sustain flames. Fire is not simply discovered once, it must be maintained daily. There is also chemistry in this world, even if no one names it that way. Adhesives made from birch tar or resin in earlier and related prehistoric contexts show that ancient people understood how heat could change materials. Ochre can be ground, mixed, applied, and perhaps used in hide-working as well as symbolic marking. Fat can be rendered, sinew can be dried and rehydrated, hide can be scraped, stretched, smoked, softened, and sewn. These processes depend on close observation. If a material is heated too much, it fails. If it is not worked enough, it stiffens. If a binding is poorly made, a weapon breaks at the worst possible moment. The tools also shape time. A hunt may last a day, but preparing for it may take many days before and many after. Someone must make points, repair shafts, scrape hides, sew clothing, collect fuel, process sinew, maintain lamps, and teach younger hands. The spectacular moment of survival, the animal falling on the plain, depends on hundreds of quieter moments that came first. Much of this work may have been shared across age and gender in ways archaeologists cannot fully reconstruct. It is risky to assign tasks too neatly from modern assumptions. The record shows activities, it rarely names the people who performed them. So the forgotten Ice Age people survived not through one great invention, but through a web of small mastered acts, a blade edge, a stitched seam, a banked ember, a lamp flame, a polished point, a hide softened before frost makes it useless. These things do not rise like monuments, and they do not announce themselves from the landscape. But without them, there is no journey, no shelter, no hunt, no return. Against the scale of the Ice Age, they seem almost too small to matter. Yet in the hands of people who know how to use them, they become the difference between a frozen silence and a camp still breathing in the dark. After the tools are repaired and the meat is cut, after the wind has pressed itself against hide walls and the fire has settled into a lower glow, another kind of survival begins. It is quieter than hunting, less visible than a mammoth bone shelter, and far harder for archaeology to recover. It happens in the space between people in shared food, remembered roots, rules of marriage, teaching, ornament, care for the injured, attention to children, and the stories that keep a group from becoming only a collection of cold bodies waiting for dawn. The forgotten Ice Age people survive the impossible, not merely because they have blades and fire, but because they have society. A human being alone on the mammoth steppe is fragile. Even the most skilled hunter cannot be awake at all times, cannot raise children alone, cannot remember every distant route, cannot make every tool, gather every fuel, watch every horizon, treat every wound, and carry every loss without help. A small band is still vulnerable, but it is already a solution. People divide attention. Someone watches the fire while another sleeps. Someone repairs a torn boot. Someone notices a child's cough before it becomes deadly. Someone remembers where stone was found 3 seasons ago. Someone recognizes the track of an animal that passed before sunrise. Survival becomes distributed across many minds and many hands. This kind of cooperation rarely leaves a clean mark in the ground. Archaeology can find hearths, bones, ornaments, burials, and tools, but it cannot easily recover a look of warning, a gesture of instruction, or the exact rule that decides how meat is shared. Yet those invisible structures must have existed. Large kills require distribution. Long journeys require coordination. Children require years of care before they can fully support themselves. Elders may carry knowledge even when their bodies slow. Injured people may survive if others feed and protect them. What survives in the record suggests that Ice Age life was not a brutal contest of isolated individuals. It was a web of obligation, and without that web, intelligence alone would not have been enough. Around the fire, knowledge moves. A child watches how a blade is held, how sparks are protected, how hide is scraped without tearing, how a point is bound into a shaft, how fat is saved, how bone is cracked for marrow. Some lessons may be spoken, others simply repeated until the body understands. The fire extends the day, making darkness usable. In winter, when nights are long and movement may be limited, the hearth becomes school, workshop, shelter, and memory all at once. It is easy to imagine Ice Age life as constant motion, but stillness matters too. People survive because there are hours when they stop, gather close, and turn experience into teaching. Ornaments offer one of the most intimate clues to this social world. Pierced teeth, shells carried far from coasts, beads made from ivory or bone, pendants, pigments, and decorated objects appear across Upper Paleolithic sites. Some may have marked identity, age, skill, group membership, family ties, ritual status, or personal beauty. Scholars still debate their exact meanings, and it is unlikely that one explanation fits all ornaments across thousands of years. But ornaments worn on the body do something tools do not. They speak before words. They show that the wearer belongs somewhere, remembers something, or wishes to be seen in a particular way. In a world of scattered groups, recognition matters. The movement of ornaments and raw materials also hints at connections beyond the camp. A shell found far inland may have travelled through exchange or direct movement. Stone from a distant source may reveal a remembered route or a relationship with another group. Similar decorative traditions across wide areas may suggest shared styles, shared meanings, or repeated contact. The evidence remains incomplete, but these patterns make one thing difficult to deny. Ice Age communities were often linked across distance. The frozen world may have been sparsely populated, but it was not socially empty. Firelight in one valley could be part of a much wider constellation. Gatherings may have been especially important when herds concentrated, when seasons allowed travel, or when certain places drew people repeatedly. Small groups may have come together in larger numbers. Such meetings would have been practical, emotional, and perhaps ceremonial. People could exchange stone, hides, ornaments, partners, news, and stories. Young people could meet others beyond their close kin. Skilled makers could be watched and imitated. Disputes might be settled. Alliances renewed, rituals performed, and memories strengthened. No single site can reveal the full complexity of these gatherings, but the need for them is clear. A society spread thin across cold country must find ways to come back together. There is tenderness in this, though it should not be romanticized. Ice Age life could be harsh, and small communities may have known conflict, fear, exclusion, and grief. Cooperation does not mean constant peace. The same closeness that protects people can also create tension. Food shortages test generosity. Failed hunts test leadership. Dangerous travel tests patience. Illness tests obligation. The archaeological record sometimes preserves violence in prehistory. Though the evidence varies by time and place, it would be naive to imagine the Ice Age as either a noble harmony or a constant war. Human societies are rarely so simple. What can be said is that long-term survival in such environments required enough trust to keep people working together more often than they broke apart. Ritual life, too, flickers at the edge of what can be known. Burials with ochre, ornaments, or careful placement suggest that the dead were sometimes treated with attention beyond disposal. Cave art, carved figurines, engraved bones, and unusual arrangements of objects hint at symbolic worlds that do not translate easily into modern categories. Some images may have related to animals, memory, identity, teaching, initiation, or places believed to hold special power. Some interpretations are more cautious than others, and unsupported popular theories often say more about modern imagination than Ice Age belief. Still, the existence of symbolic behavior is not in doubt. These people lived with meanings that exceeded immediate hunger. A surprising detail is how much time such symbolic work could require. A bead must be shaped, pierced, polished, and perhaps sewn onto clothing. A carving demands attention that could have been spent elsewhere. Pigment must be gathered and prepared. Deep cave art requires light, planning, and movement into places where ordinary life does not happen. This does not mean Ice Age people were free from hardship. It means that meaning itself was part of survival. Shared symbols bind groups. Beauty can carry identity. Ritual can organize fear. Memory can make suffering bearable. The fire, then, is more than a chemical reaction. It is the center around which human life becomes human. Around it, people transform animal bodies into clothing, stone into tools, children into skilled adults, experience into story, and fear into something that can be held collectively. Outside the firelight, the Ice Age remains vast and indifferent. Inside it, a small group creates a world of names, faces, obligations, jokes, grief, skill, and belonging. The cold may strip life to essentials, but among those essentials is connection. And this is why the forgotten people cannot be understood only through climate charts or tool types. The last glacial maximum tests bodies, but it also tests relationships. A band survives because someone shares meat, someone teaches, someone remembers, someone tends the flame, someone carries an ornament from a distant meeting, someone keeps faith with the group when the wind makes every choice harder. In the long dark of the Ice Age, society itself becomes shelter. In the places where the record falls silent, the Ice Age becomes most haunting. A cave that once held firelight shows no later ash. A river terrace where people shaped stone for generations offers no new scatter of blades. A region that once seemed crossed by hunters, families, and remembered paths becomes archaeologically quiet, as if the people simply stepped out of the world and left the wind to cover their tracks. But silence is one of the hardest kinds of evidence to understand. It can mean death, migration, abandonment, transformation. or simply that time has hidden the traces too well for us to find them. This is the mystery of the missing people. During the coldest phases of the last ice age, large parts of the northern world appear to lose population. Some areas that had earlier signs of human presence seem to empty. In other places, occupation becomes thinner, more scattered, more difficult to detect. The pattern is not identical everywhere, and scholars still debate its meaning, but the broad impression is powerful. The cold does not merely challenge human life. It rearranges where human life can remain visible, across exposed plains, near glacial margins, in dry steppe zones and harsh interior regions. The evidence sometimes fades to almost nothing. It is tempting to imagine catastrophe in simple terms. A people starve, a culture vanishes, a landscape becomes empty. Sometimes that may have happened. Small populations are vulnerable, especially when climate stress reduces food, fuel, safe routes, and contact with other groups. A few failed seasons can damage a community for years. A band that loses too many adults, too many children, or too many skilled knowledge keepers may not recover, if neighbouring groups are far away. Merging or seeking help becomes harder. In a world already thinly populated, disappearance does not require a dramatic massacre or sudden disaster. It can happen through slow arithmetic, fewer births, more deaths, broken networks, abandoned routes, and one winter too many. But archaeology demands caution. A missing site is not the same as a dead population. People may have moved into regions where evidence is now buried deeply, eroded away, or submerged beneath modern seas. During the Ice Age, lower sea levels exposed vast coastal plains that later disappeared under rising water. If people lived or travelled along those ancient shorelines, many of their camps are now beyond reach, drowned beneath sediment and waves, open-air camps in dry, windy landscapes can vanish far more easily than cave occupations. Light shelters leave little behind. A group that stays briefly, repairs a few tools, eats food that leaves no durable remains, and moves on may pass almost invisibly through the record. Even when traces survive, we may not recognize them easily. A scatter of stone may be disturbed by frost, animals, roots, or later human activity. Bones may decay in acidic soils. Hearths may be washed away. Organic tools, clothing, bags, ropes, nets, wooden shafts, and hide shelters usually disappear. The Ice Age world was full of perishable things, and those things were often central to survival. What survives in the record is biased towards stone, bone, teeth, shells, pigment, and places protected by unusual conditions. The missing people may not always be missing because they were gone. They may be missing because their most ordinary lives were made of materials time does not respect. Still, there are real disappearances behind some of the silence. Ancient DNA, stone tool traditions, and changes in settlement patterns increasingly suggest that some Ice Age populations did not simply continue unchanged into later times. Groups moved, contracted, blended, or were replaced by others. A culture known from tools may vanish from a region, while another appears later with different practices. But tools do not equal people in a simple way. A new style can spread through migration. Imitation, exchange, or changing needs. A population can adopt a new technology without being replaced. Another population can disappear biologically while some of its skills, roots, or symbols survive in neighbouring groups. No single explanation fully accounts for all the transitions. This uncertainty makes the missing people more human, not less. Their lives did not follow neat archaeological categories. A family might join another group after hunger weakens their own. Children from one tradition might grow up learning the tools and stories of another. A marriage can move knowledge across a frontier. A crisis can dissolve old identities. A refuge can gather survivors from several vanished camps until the descendants no longer remember every separate origin. By the time archaeologists find the later layer, the older names, if there were names tied to those groups, are gone beyond recovery. There is also the possibility of cultural survival without visible continuity. A route remembered by one group may be taught to another. A method for sewing a boot, preparing a hide, shaping a point, or finding a winter crossing may continue even if the people who first carried it disappear as a distinct community. The record preserves objects more readily than relationships, but human survival often moves through relationships. When a group fades, not everything it knew necessarily dies with it. Some knowledge may become absorbed so completely that it leaves no separate signature. The missing people force us to confront the limits of reconstruction. Modern science can measure ancient climate, analyze pollen, date charcoal, identify butchered bone, trace stone sources, and recover DNA from fragments that once seemed silent forever. Yet even with these tools, the record remains partial. We can see patterns of occupation and abandonment, but not always the reasons behind each choice. We can identify population shifts, but not the fear in a camp when familiar animals fail to arrive. We can map possible refuges, but not the argument over whether to leave an old shelter before winter. What survives in the record suggests pressure, movement, and loss. It does not preserve every decision. Some vanished regions may have been remembered for generations by the people who left them. A valley abandoned during the worst cold might remain in stories as a place of ancestors, danger, hunger, or return. A route closed by ice could still exist in memory long after footsteps ceased. When climate later improved, descendants or unrelated groups may have moved back into landscapes that had once been emptied. To archaeologists, this can look like reoccupation. To the people themselves, it may have felt like discovery, return, or something in between. The land may have held old traces, even then bones weathering from slopes, stone flakes near streams, dark stains of ancient fires no one could explain. The silence is therefore not empty. It is filled with possibilities, losses, and cautions. It reminds us that survival stories always contain those who did not survive, or who survived only by becoming part of someone else's story. The forgotten Ice Age people are not one unbroken tribe marching confidently through the cold. They are many groups, some enduring, some moving, some merging, some disappearing beyond recognition. Their world is a shifting map of presence and absence, and perhaps that is why their story feels so fragile. The people who left the richest traces were not necessarily the most important, only the most visible. Others may have lived with equal skill and vanished without a cave, a burial, or a mammoth bone wall to speak for them. They crossed frozen ground, tended fires, taught children, followed herds, feared storms, and made choices under pressure. Then the record thins. The wind moves over the old places. The snow falls. The silence begins. For a long time, the forgotten Ice Age people were known almost entirely by what they made and where they left it. A stone point, a carved object, a burial, a layer of ash, a cluster of animal bones cut by human hands, these were the main witnesses. Archaeologists compared tool shapes, artistic styles, settlement patterns, and raw materials, trying to follow cultures through the cold as if the past were a trail of objects. That work remains essential. But in recent years, another kind of evidence has begun to speak from beneath the frost and soil, a quieter witness sealed inside bones and teeth, ancient DNA. The change is profound because tools can mislead in ways genes sometimes clarify. Two groups may make similar blades because they descend from a shared tradition, because they exchange knowledge, because similar problems encourage similar solutions, or because one group adopted the habits of another. A change in tool style may signal new people arriving, but it may also reflect old people learning new methods. Ancient genomes do not solve every mystery, but they reveal that Ice Age Europe and Asia were not populated by one stable, unchanging people. They were shaped by survival, isolation, movement, mixture, and replacement. To recover this evidence, scientists work with fragments that look almost hopeless: a tooth, a small piece of skull, or powdered material drilled from remains damaged by time. DNA breaks down after death, and cold helps preserve it, but even in favourable conditions it becomes fragmented, contaminated, and faint. Modern human DNA is everywhere, carried by breath, skin, and touch. So ancient DNA laboratories operate almost like clean rooms for ghosts, trying to separate the person who died 20,000 years ago from everyone who has handled the bone since. What emerges is not a family tree with simple branches. It is more like a braided river. Some Ice Age groups show continuity across long periods in certain refuges. Others appear, spread, and then become less visible or vanish genetically. Populations related to one archaeological culture may not always be the direct ancestors of later people using similar tools. In some cases, groups once assumed to be culturally continuous turn out to include major genetic shifts. In others, genetic ancestry persists even when material culture changes. The evidence remains incomplete, because ancient genomes are still rare compared with the number of people who once lived, and preservation favours some regions over others. But the pattern is clear enough to overturn older simplicity. One striking lesson is that refuges mattered not only as places where people endured the cold, but as reservoirs of ancestry. During the harshest phases, populations contracted into more livable zones. Over time, some of those sheltered groups contributed strongly to later people who expanded when the climate improved. Others did not. In parts of Europe, ancient DNA has helped show both persistence in some regions and reduction, or replacement in others. Scholars still debate the timing, scale, and causes of these shifts. But the genetic record makes one thing difficult to ignore: survival was uneven. This unevenness gives the missing people a sharper outline. Some groups who left tools, art, and camps may have no clear descendants in later populations. That does not make their lives failures. It means their biological line, as far as current evidence can tell, became faint, merged, or disappeared. Other groups may have survived not as recognizable cultures, but as ancestry folded into later communities. A child born after two bands meet in a refuge can carry genes from both worlds while learning the tools, stories, and roots of one. Generations later, the distinction may be invisible in artifacts, but present in bone. Yet genes must be interpreted carefully. They do not reveal language, belief, personal identity, or the full shape of a society. A genome can show relatedness, ancestry, population size, and mixture, but it cannot tell us what a person called themselves, whom they loved, what stories they knew, or how they understood the animals painted on a cave wall. There is a danger in letting DNA become the new myth of certainty. It is powerful evidence, not the whole past. What survives in the record suggests biological movement, but human life includes adoption, alliance, teaching, memory, and choice. A person's ancestry is not the same as their culture. There is also the matter of scale. Ancient DNA often comes from individuals, and individuals are not populations by themselves. One burial can be extraordinary but not representative. A skeleton in a cave may belong to a local person, a traveller, an outsider adopted into a group, or someone whose life was unusual in ways archaeology cannot see. Scientists use broader patterns when enough samples exist, but many Ice Age regions remain thinly sampled. No single explanation fully accounts for every genetic shift, and new discoveries can still change the picture. The story is becoming clearer, but it is not finished. Still, the revelations are extraordinary. DNA shows that Ice Age people were connected across distances wider than once imagined, yet also separated long enough for distinct ancestries to form. It shows that the cold did not simply pause human history until farming began. It was an active force, shaping who survived, who moved, who met, and who disappeared. It reveals bottlenecks, moments when human groups may have been small enough that chance mattered greatly. It hints at the loneliness of some communities and the sudden importance of contact when routes opened again. In a strange way, ancient DNA returns individuality to people who seemed lost in categories. Behind every genetic sample is a body that once needed warmth, food, kin, and shelter. A tooth from a child, a fragment from an adult, a burial stained with ochre, a bone preserved in a cold cave, each belonged to someone whose life was not lived as data. The genome is only the shadow of that life, but it is a shadow cast by something real. The forgotten Ice Age people, then, are no longer only makers of tools or painters of animals. They are ancestors, cousins, vanished branches, survivors of refuges, members of lineages that moved like sparks across a freezing continent. Some still echo faintly in people living today. Others seem to have gone out, leaving no clear descendants, only objects and fragments in the ground. The cold sorted them with terrible patience, but it did not erase them completely. Beneath the ice, beneath the soil, in the locked rooms of bone and tooth, their story kept waiting. Far to the northeast, beyond the more familiar caves of Ice Age Europe and the mammoth bone camps of the Western Steppe, another cold world waits at the edge of the map. It is a place that later generations will call Beringia, though no one living there knows that name. During the Ice Age, when sea levels fall because so much water is locked inside glaciers, the land between Siberia and Alaska opens into a vast exposed region. It is not a narrow bridge in the simple sense often imagined, not a thin strip of land with people marching across it in a single heroic line. It is a continent-like landscape of plains, rivers, wetlands, dry steppe, wind, animals, and seasons, a frozen waiting room between worlds. Beringia matters because it changes the human story from a tale of endurance in Eurasia into a story that eventually reaches the Americas. But the path is not simple. The old picture imagined hunters following mammoths across a land bridge and quickly spreading south. The real evidence is more complicated, more interesting, and more uncertain. People may have lived in parts of Northeast Asia for long periods before any successful movement into the Americas. Some groups may have reached Beringia and remained there for generations, perhaps even thousands of years, while ice sheets and harsh conditions blocked or limited movement farther east and south. Scholars still debate the timing, routes, and population history. But the idea of Beringia as a place where people waited, adapted, and changed has become one of the most powerful possibilities in Ice Age archaeology. This landscape is cold, but not lifeless. Like other parts of the Mammoth Steppe, it can support animals that know how to live with wind and open-ground mammoth, horse, bison, reindeer, musk ox, and smaller creatures moving through a mosaic of habitats. In some periods, parts of Beringia may have been drier than the ice-covered lands around it, because the great glaciers locked away moisture and changed weather patterns. It is an exposed world, but it is not all ice. That distinction is crucial. If Beringia had been nothing but frozen desert, it could not have held people. Instead, it offers a difficult but usable environment, one that rewards mobility, careful hunting, and deep knowledge of seasonal change. For humans arriving from Siberia, this is not an entirely alien world. They already know cold. They already know open country, migrating herds, scarce fuel, and the importance of clothing, fire, stone, bone, and cooperation. Yet Beringia also creates new pressures. Distances are immense, populations are likely small and scattered. Contact with other groups may be rare in some periods. A community living here must manage isolation as carefully as hunger. If a route fails, if a group becomes cut off, if weather or ice blocks movement, survival depends on whether social memory and biological numbers remain strong enough to endure. The evidence remains incomplete because Beringia is partly vanished. Much of the Ice Age land now lies under the Bering and Chukchi seas. Rising waters after the glaciers melt drown camps, animal trails, river valleys, and perhaps entire landscapes where people once lived. Archaeologists search what remains on either side in Siberia and Alaska, but the center of the story is partly underwater. This makes certainty difficult. A missing site may not mean people were absent. It may mean their camps are beneath cold water and sediment, out of reach except through rare traces recovered from submerged landscapes or coastal margins. Ancient DNA adds another layer. Genetic studies suggest that the ancestors of indigenous peoples of the Americas are connected to populations in Northeast Asia, with evidence of ancient mixture and periods of separation. Some models propose that a population ancestral to Native Americans became isolated for a time, possibly in or near Beringia, before later expanding into the Americas. This is sometimes called the Beringian standstill, though the term can make it sound more static than life probably was. If people remained in that wider region for many generations, they were not standing still in any ordinary sense. They were moving within a cold landscape, hunting, gathering, forming families, changing, adapting, and passing through winters that cared nothing for future maps. The route into the Americas is also debated. One possibility involves movement through an interior corridor between retreating ice sheets, but this route may not have been open or biologically usable early enough for the first expansions. Another possibility follows the Pacific coast, where people could have moved along marine and coastal environments, using boats or shoreline resources. The challenge is that many ancient coastal sites would now be underwater because sea levels rose after the Ice Age. No single explanation fully accounts for all evidence yet, and the timing remains one of the great questions in human prehistory. But what survives in the record suggests that the peopling of the Americas was not a single simple event. It was likely a process shaped by climate, coastlines, ice, animals, and human persistence. To imagine life in this northern waiting world, one must let go of the idea of a bridge as a road. Beringia is not merely something crossed, it is lived in. A group may follow reindeer across open ground, then turn toward a river where fish or birds appear in season. They may camp near low hills that break the wind, repair clothing with bone needles, burn scarce fuel carefully, and watch the movements of animals across a horizon that seems endless. Children born there may know no other world. Their grandparents may remember places farther west. Their descendants may move into lands farther east. Between those memories lies a human life complete in itself, not just a pause between continents. There is a lesser-known irony in this story. The same cold that makes survival so difficult also creates the land that makes movement possible. Without lowered sea levels, Beringia would not exist as a broad exposed region. Without the glaciers, the pathway between worlds would be different. The Ice Age both blocks and opens doors. It seals some routes beneath ice while exposing others beneath sky. Human beings must read those changing doors without knowing where they lead in the long future. Beringia therefore becomes a place of transformation. The people who live there carry old Siberian knowledge, but over time they become something distinct. Their descendants will enter the Americas and eventually spread across landscapes, unlike anything their ancestors knew: ice margins, coasts, forests, plains, mountains, deserts, and tropical worlds far to the south. But before that expansion, before the great distances of the Americas, there is this northern threshold where survival itself is the achievement. The forgotten Ice Age people of Beringia stand at the edge of two histories. Behind them lie the cold plains of Eurasia, the old routes, the mammoths, the river camps, the stone and bone technologies refined across generations. Ahead lie continents still unknown to them, places where their descendants will make new worlds from inherited skills. They do not know they are part of a migration that later scholars will argue over for centuries. They know the wind, the animals, the hunger, the fire, and the next stretch of land ahead. That is enough. In the frozen waiting room between worlds, humanity does not simply pass through. It survives, changes, and prepares unknowingly for one of the greatest expansions in its history. The ice does not vanish like a curtain pulled away. It retreats unevenly, with pauses, reversals, floods, and long centuries in which the old world and the new world exist side by side. Glaciers shrink from some valleys while still dominating distant mountains. Rivers swell with meltwater, then change course. Lakes form where ice blocks drainage, then burst through natural dams and send violent floods across low ground. Sea levels begin to rise, slowly at first, and then with growing consequence. Drowning the coastal plains that had once been open country, the people who survive the coldest age do not wake into a gentle spring. They wake into instability. For generations, their ancestors have known the open steppe as a world of distance and herds. Now that world begins to loosen. Grasslands do not disappear everywhere at once, but trees return in many regions, first as scattered pioneers, then as expanding woodland. Birch, pine, willow, and other cold-tolerant species creep into spaces where wind once ruled. Later, in warmer places, denser forests begin to spread. This change may sound like improvement, and in some ways, it is. Wood becomes more available, shelter materials increase, new animals, plants, and seasonal resources appear. But for people whose lives have been organized around long sight lines and migrating herds, a forest can be as disruptive as an ice sheet. The great animals respond before humans fully understand the pattern. Reindeer routes shift, horses and bison withdraw from some regions. Mammoths become less common in many landscapes, their ranges fragmenting under pressure from climate, vegetation change, and perhaps human hunting as well. Scholars still debate the exact balance of causes in the decline and extinction of Ice Age megafauna, and the answer likely varies by species and region. No single explanation fully accounts for it. But to the people living through the transition, the debate would be meaningless. What matters is that familiar animals are harder to find in familiar places, and old hunting knowledge no longer works with the same certainty. A valley once watched from a high ridge may become screened by trees. Tracks that were easy to follow across open snow now vanish in leaf litter, mud, or tangled undergrowth. Animals move differently in woodland. Red deer, wild boar, elk, aurochs, and smaller forest creatures require different skills from reindeer on open ground. Ambush becomes more important. Sound changes, visibility shortens. A hunter can no longer read miles of movement from a single viewpoint. The forest gives cover to humans, but also to prey and predators. It is richer in some resources, yet more secretive. The land that once announced itself across the horizon begins to hide its life. Water becomes one of the great forces of the warming world. Meltwater rivers run strong, braided, cold, and dangerous. Floodplains shift, banks collapse. Fish may become increasingly important in some regions, especially as rivers and lakes stabilize. Wetlands attract birds and animals. Seasonal fishing, trapping, and gathering become more valuable parts of life. In places where people once followed herds across dry plains, they may now return to lake shores, river mouths, marshes, and coastlines. Tools change with these choices. Barbed points, fish hooks, nets, traps, boats, and wooden technologies become increasingly important, though many of them remain archaeologically elusive because water and wood preserve only under special conditions. The rising seas carry away an enormous part of the evidence. During the coldest age, shorelines were far beyond their modern positions. People may have camped beside rivers that now lie under the seabed, hunted on plains now covered by shallow seas, gathered shellfish along coasts that no longer exist, and followed animals across land bridges erased by water. As the ice melts, these worlds drown. The process is gradual in human terms in some places and frighteningly fast in others, especially where storms, collapses, or sudden drainage events reshape the coast. What survives in the record suggests that many late Ice Age and early post-Ice Age communities lived near water, but much of their story has been taken by the sea. This is one of the most haunting transformations in prehistory. The survivors of the Cold watch not only the return of warmth, but the disappearance of land. A place where grandparents walked may become marsh. A hunting plain may become an inlet. A camp may be abandoned because the water creeps closer year after year. A route between hills may turn into a channel. To later archaeologists, it appears as sea level rise. To the people living there, it is the world changing its boundaries, slowly swallowing memory. The warming also changes social geography. As formerly frozen or harsh lands become habitable again, people move outward from refuges. Some follow animals north. Others explore newly opened valleys, river corridors, and coastlines. Groups that were once separated by cold and distance may meet again, while others encounter people whose ancestors endured in different refuges with different tools, styles, and histories. Expansion is not a simple spreading of one people into empty space. It is a complicated reweaving of human networks across a transformed continent. Some regions may have been truly sparse. Others may have held small groups already adapted to local conditions. The evidence remains incomplete, but movement after the ice is clearly not one road. It is many paths. As old pressures ease, new pressures appear. Forest hunting may support smaller, more dispersed groups than great herd landscapes in some regions. Rivers and coasts can concentrate people seasonally, creating opportunities for exchange and tension. Warmer climates bring new foods, but also new diseases, insects, and seasonal challenges. Snow no longer preserves meat in the same way. Storage must change. Clothing must change. Shelters must change. A technology perfected for open cold may be less useful under trees and rain. The survivors must remain what their ancestors were flexible. There is a surprising kind of grief hidden in this adaptation. The end of the Ice Age is often imagined as relief, but for people raised in the Old World, warming may also feel like loss. The mammoth steppe, with its enormous herds and open horizons, is fading. Animals that shaped stories, tools, clothing, and identity are retreating or disappearing. Places of return are changing beyond recognition. Old routes no longer lead to the same abundance. The people survive. But survival asks them to let go of the world that made them. And still, they continue. They learn the forest edge. They follow rivers with new attention. They take fish, birds, deer, boar, and smaller game. They make tools suited to wood, water, and shifting seasons. They occupy camps where the old cold traditions mix with new experiments. They carry ornaments, memories, and ancestry from the refugees into landscapes opening after thousands of years of ice. They are not the same as their ancestors of the frozen maximum, but they are not separate from them either. The old knowledge remains beneath the new, like buried ground under spring growth. When the ice retreats, it does not end the story of endurance, it changes the test. The forgotten Ice Age people have survived the impossible cold, but now they must survive transformation itself. The world becomes greener, wetter, louder, and less predictable in different ways. The wind-scoured plain gives way to rivers, forests, coastlines, and drowned memories. The survivors move through it all, carrying fire from one age into another. The children of the survivors are born into a world their grandparents would recognize only in fragments. The cold has not vanished from the earth, and winter still has teeth. But the old Ice Age order is breaking apart. Forests spread where open plains once carried herds across impossible distances. Rivers cut new channels through soft ground. Coastlines retreat inland as the sea rises over drowned valleys and lost hunting grounds. The mammoths that once stood like moving landmarks on the horizon are gone from many regions or fading toward their final refuges. The people who inherit this changing world carry the memory of the frozen age in their tools, bodies and stories, but they must learn to live in landscapes that no longer obey the old rules. They move north and east and west, outward from refuges that held life through the harshest centuries. Some follow reindeer into newly opened country. Others travel along rivers, lake shores, and coasts, where fish, birds, shellfish, and seasonal plants add new layers to survival. Some enter forests that would have seemed strange to ancestors trained on the open steppe, learning to hunt animals that vanish behind trunks and brush, instead of gathering in dark lines across distant grass. The old long-distance vision of the plains gives way to closer, more hidden worlds. A hunter now listens for movement in leaves, watches broken twigs, studies mud instead of wind-polished snow, and waits in cover where patience matters more than pursuit. Yet these people are not beginning again from nothing. They carry skills shaped by the cold. They know how to repair tools, sew clothing, store food, read animal behavior, move through dangerous country, and maintain relationships across distance. Those skills do not disappear just because the climate warms. They change direction. The same intelligence that once turned mammoth bone into shelter can turn wood into boats, traps, frames, handles, and structures. The same attention that once followed reindeer across tundra can follow fish runs, bird migrations, deer paths, and seasonal plant growth. Survival remains a matter of reading patterns, only now the patterns are greener, wetter, and more crowded. Ancient DNA suggests that some descendants of Ice Age refuges expand into new territories as conditions improve, while other lineages arrive, mix, or replace earlier groups in ways still being studied. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the timing and scale of many population movements after the last glacial peak. But the broad picture is one of motion and mixture. Europe, Asia, and the lands beyond Beringia are not repopulated by one simple wave of people. They are filled through many movements, some small, some large, some visible in stone tools, some clearer in genes, some almost hidden entirely. When groups meet in these newly open landscapes, the encounter is not only biological, it is cultural. People bring different ways of making points, carving bone, decorating bodies, arranging camps, choosing prey, and remembering land. One group may know a river valley intimately. Another may bring a better method for working antler or preparing hides. A marriage can join roots. A gathering can spread a new style. A child can grow up with grandparents from different worlds and learn that more than one way of living is possible. Archaeology often records these changes as tool traditions or material culture, but beneath every shift are human relationships that cannot be fully recovered. Some of the older Ice Age identities may dissolve during this process. A people who survive for generations in a refuge may expand, meet others, and gradually lose the visible signs that once made them distinct. Their ancestry may continue while their old tool forms fade, or their tools may influence neighbours even as their genetic line becomes thinner. This is one of the quiet complexities of prehistory survival, is not always the preservation of a name, a style, or a separate people. Sometimes survival means becoming part of something larger, leaving traces that are real but difficult to separate. The changing world also demands new rhythms of settlement. Camps may become more tied to rivers and lakes, where repeated seasonal use can create richer deposits. In some areas, people may remain longer in certain places because local resources become dependable across parts of the year. This is not farming yet, and it is not civilization in the later sense, but it is a shift toward more varied and sometimes more anchored lifeways. Fish, nuts, seeds, shellfish, birds, deer, and wild plants can encourage different patterns from the great herd movements of the open steppe. The road to later settled life is not straight, and no single explanation fully accounts for how different regions change. But the first steps are found in these flexible adaptations. There is also loss in the inheritance. Children born after the worst cold may hear of animals they rarely see. They may walk near shores where elders remember dry land. They may pass ancient camps half buried in new vegetation, places where earlier people once watched open horizons now blocked by trees. A carved pendant, an old point, a story tied to a hill or cave may carry fragments of a world already fading. The Ice Age does not end cleanly in memory. It lingers as absence. In some regions, the descendants of the survivors become part of later hunter-gatherer populations who live through the Mesolithic, mastering forests, waterways, and coastlines with remarkable skill. They build canoes, use microlithic tools, fish with specialized gear, hunt red deer and boar, gather hazelnuts, exploit shellfish, and create new forms of ornament and burial practice. These later people are not simply the same as the Ice Age hunters, but they are not disconnected from them either. They stand on the far side of the Great Thaw, carrying transformed versions of older knowledge. Farther east and across the northern threshold into the Americas, descendant populations move into astonishingly diverse lands. Ice margins, coastal routes, inland plains, mountains, deserts, and forests all become part of the expanding human map. The people who spread through these regions carry technologies and social abilities forged in older worlds of cold and distance, but they adapt rapidly to new animals, new plants, and new dangers. Their story belongs to many later histories. Each distinct, yet the shadow of Ice Age endurance lies behind them. The children of the survivors therefore inherit more than life. They inherit flexibility itself. They inherit the ability to leave when the land changes, to stay when staying becomes wise, to meet strangers and sometimes become kin, to remember old worlds without being trapped by them. The impossible cold has narrowed humanity, tested it, and in places nearly erased it. But from the refuges, from Beringia, from river valleys and sheltered margins, people move outward again. They do not rebuild the Ice Age world. They carry its lessons into a different one. The legacy of the forgotten Ice Age people does not stand in stone towers or carved royal names. It lies scattered in quieter things, in the places where fire once burned low against the wind, in bone needles polished by use, in blades struck from flint with a precision that still carries the movement of a vanished hand, in animal bones opened for marrow, in beads that may once have touched skin, in cave walls where animals move forever through mineral darkness, and in the faint genetic echoes that pass unevenly into later human populations. Their world leaves no chronicles, yet it refuses to disappear completely. Every trace is small, but together they reveal one of the deepest truths about humanity. Before people build cities, they learn how to endure. What makes their survival so extraordinary is not simply that the climate is cold. Many animals are built for cold. Humans are not, at least not in any simple biological sense. Human skin freezes, hands lose feeling, infants need protection, and the body consumes energy with frightening speed when warmth is gone. The Ice Age survivors answer this weakness not by becoming less human, but by becoming more intensely human. They survive through clothing, fire, planning, cooperation, memory, symbolic life, and technology carried across generations. Their bodies remain vulnerable, Yet their cultures become strong enough to turn vulnerability into adaptation. This is why the smallest artifacts matter. A needle is not only a needle, it is a sign of fitted clothing, of winter preparation, of someone who knows how hide behaves when scraped, softened, pierced, and worn. A stone blade is not only a cutting edge, it is a sign of learned technique, raw material knowledge, travel, teaching, repair, and the anticipation of future need. A hearth is not only ash, it is warmth, cooking, light, social gathering, tool-making, protection, and the extension of human time into long winter darkness. Archaeology often separates these things into categories, but in life they belong together. The people did not experience survival as a list of technologies. They experienced it as a living rhythm of tasks that had to be done well enough, often enough for the group to continue. Their legacy also lies in the way they teach us to think about collapse. The last glacial maximum is not a collapse of civilization, because civilization in the later sense has not yet appeared, but it is a collapse of possibility in many landscapes. Roots close, populations shrink, regions fall silent, familiar animals shift, the weather hardens, some groups disappear from the record, and perhaps from the world. Others survive in refuges, along margins, in river valleys, on coasts now drowned. And in cold northern thresholds like Beringia, no single explanation fully accounts for who endures and who vanishes. Climate matters greatly, but so do luck, mobility, social networks, local ecology, knowledge, and the fragile arithmetic of births and deaths. That complexity is part of the lesson. Human survival is never guaranteed by intelligence alone. A brilliant toolmaker still needs food. A skilled hunter still needs a group. A strong group still needs a landscape that offers something to work with. The Ice Age people survive where culture and environment can still meet. When the world gives too little, even knowledge may fail. When the world gives a narrow opening, knowledge can become the difference between extinction and continuity. They also force a change in how the human past is imagined. For a long time, history often seemed to begin with writing, cities, rulers, walls, temples, and war. Everything before that was pushed into a dim prelude, as if people without farms or monuments were only waiting for real history to arrive. The Ice Age record destroys that idea. These people are not waiting. They are solving problems of enormous difficulty. They are building shelters from mammoth bones, sewing protective clothing, crossing landscapes larger than later kingdoms, maintaining exchange networks, creating art, caring for one another, and preserving knowledge without writing. Their achievements are not lesser because they are not monumental. They are simply harder to see. The cave images, where they survive, sharpen this realization. A painted animal in darkness is not a casual mark made by someone with nothing better to do. It requires pigment, light, planning, movement into difficult spaces, and a shared world of meaning. Scholars still debate the purposes of Ice Age art, and caution is necessary because modern interpretation can easily become fantasy. But the existence of such art tells us that these people live with imagination as well as hunger. They do not only measure the world by what can be eaten, they observe, remember, transform, and represent. They carry animals not only on their backs as meat and hide, but in their minds. Ancient DNA adds another more intimate legacy. Some Ice Age lineages contribute to later populations, others fade, merge, or vanish beyond clear recognition. This can feel strangely sad, as if whole worlds of kinship and language have dissolved into silence. Yet even vanished branches matter. A population does not need to survive unchanged into the present to have shaped the human story. They occupied landscapes, exchanged knowledge, altered ecosystems, passed tools and partners between groups, and made choices that influenced who came after. What survives in the record suggests that the human past is not a straight line of winners replacing losers, but a braided history of endurance, disappearance, mixture, and transformation. Their story also lingers in modern humans in a broader sense. Every city, every field, every road, every digital map rests on a much older foundation of Ice Age abilities, planning beyond the present, cooperating beyond the family, carrying knowledge across generations, adapting to unstable climates, and making meaning in dangerous landscapes. The world today is warmer in most places, louder, brighter, and crowded with human construction. Yet the old lesson remains. People survive not because the world is stable, but because they can learn when it is not. The forgotten Ice Age people leave no final message. They do not know they will become a mystery. They do not know that fragments of their bones will be sequenced in laboratories, that their tools will sit behind glass, that their campfires will be dated by machines, that their painted animals will draw visitors who whisper in caves. They know the next storm, the next herd, the next thaw, the next child, the next journey. And perhaps that is enough. Their legacy is not a declaration. It is continuation. They survive the impossible, and because they survive, later worlds become possible. The fire is low now, and the great cold has moved backward into memory. The plains where mammoths walked are changed beyond recognition. Some are forest, some are farmland, some lie beneath cities, roads, rivers, or the quiet pressure of the sea. The caves remain in places, but the voices that once moved through them are gone. The old shorelines are drowned. The old camps are buried. The wind still crosses open ground in winter, but it no longer carries the whole weight of that vanished age. And yet something of those people remains whenever the deep past is approached with patience, not as a simple myth of heroic hunters, and not as a bleak story of suffering alone, but as a human story made from endurance, intelligence, tenderness, danger, and loss. They were not symbols. They were people waking in the cold, repairing what had torn, feeding children, watching the sky, remembering the dead, and choosing again and again to continue. Their lives were ordinary to them, even when they appear almost impossible to us. Time has taken their names, their languages, their songs, and most of their shelters. It has taken the shape of their faces in firelight, the sound of their footsteps on frozen ground, the small private meanings of beads, pigments, scars, and stories. But time has not taken everything. A blade still keeps the angle of a hand. A needle still suggests the warmth of a sewn garment. A bone still shows the cut of hunger and skill. A cave wall still holds an animal moving through darkness, as if the painter has only just stepped away. The forgotten Ice Age people do not ask to be remembered. They could not have imagined the world that would one day look back for them. But in looking back, something becomes clearer about ourselves. Humanity is not only the history of what was built when times were favourable, it is also the history of what was preserved when the world became severe. It is the fragile flame carried through wind. It is the root remembered after snow has covered every track. It is the hand that keeps working when the night is long. Far beyond the last shelter, beyond the last herd on the horizon, beyond the last ember fading in a ring of stones, the frozen world grows silent. Snow drifts over the camp. The people move on. For a moment, their footprints hold their shape. Then the wind begins its slow work, and the land keeps only what it can.